It started with one photo, a single image leaked online. A respected federal judge, handcuffed, eyes lowered, surrounded by agents. No caption, no explanation, just raw, unfiltered chaos. By mid-morning, it had consumed every screen in the country. News banners, viral podcasts, primetime panels. And just like that, the hearing was scheduled. But what unfolded inside that Capitol hearing room wasn't just about a photo. It was about the system that let it happen. Senator Ted Cruz, long dismissed by critics as combative, didn't come to posture. He came with names, timelines, and a folder full of uncomfortable truths. By the end of the day, it wasn't Judge Dugan or the photo that made headlines. It was the fact that Senator Elizabeth Warren, once thought untouchable, had stopped asking questions and started avoiding them. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness won't just challenge what you believe about politics. It will unravel everything the media told you about who protects the law and who hides behind it. The image hit social media at exactly 6:14 a.m. An anonymous account, fewer than 200 followers, posted it without comment. Within 20 minutes, it was national news. By 7 a.m., Senator Elizabeth Warren was live on cable, calling the image un-American, disturbing, and proof that something had gone catastrophically wrong inside federal institutions. By noon, the Senate Oversight Committee had been called into emergency session. Topic: not the judge herself, but how the arrest was orchestrated, and why no one had been told in advance. Senator Ted Cruz entered the chamber in his usual no-frills style. Dark suit, American flag pin, and a single black folder in hand. Cameras clicked, reporters shouted, but he didn't flinch. Inside, the silence was louder than the tension. Warren sat already at the center of the semicircle, eyes on her notes, not looking up. The first voice didn't come from her. It came from Senator Durbin. "We've all seen the image," he said. "A federal judge, detained, no charges announced, no statement. Senator Cruz, what exactly is going on here?" Cruz opened his folder. He didn't take anything out. He simply looked up and said, "What you saw was the end of a very long road, not the beginning of one." The chamber stirred. Durbin leaned in. "Are you telling us this was authorized?" Cruz's voice didn't rise. "I'm telling you this, no one but judge, senator, or committee chair is above the law." That line hit the room like a thunderclap. Senator Warren stirred at last, adjusting her microphone. "So you're saying this was leaked deliberately?" she asked, her tone sharp. Cruz shook his head once. "No, but I'm saying it wasn't leaked by us." The atmosphere changed instantly. Senator Gillibrand jumped in. "Do you know who did leak it?" "Not yet," Cruz replied, "but I intend to find out." Then he turned directly to Warren, calm, not combative. "You've spoken loudly about accountability, Senator," Cruz said. "I trust you'll welcome it now that it's close to home." Warren's eyes narrowed. "Senator Cruz, let's not pretend this hearing is about me." Cruz didn't blink. "No, it's about trust. And that trust has been broken because justice only seems to matter when it protects the right narrative." Another pause. This time, not awkward silence, but the kind of silence that means something has shifted, and the real confrontation hadn't even started yet. "That's not just unprecedented," Senator Warren snapped, her voice tightening. "It's dangerous." Senator Ted Cruz didn't flinch. "What's dangerous," he said calmly, "is allowing power to protect itself." There was a brief pause. Then Warren reached into a folder of her own and pulled out a printed email thread. "This," she said, holding it up for the cameras to see, "is an internal memo from your staff, dated 3 days before the arrest. It outlines a media strategy. Would you care to explain that?" Cruz didn't blink. Yes, it's called transparency," Warren scoffed. "Transparency," she repeated. "From where I'm sitting, it looks like narrative to control, media manipulation." For the first time, Cruz leaned in slightly. "Senator, your office gave 3 interviews this morning. You went on national television and called this arrest an assault on democracy. Is that not media strategy?" A ripple moved through the room, eyebrows raised. A few aides shifted in their seats. The dynamic was changing. Warren straightened her spine, tone sharpening. "Don't deflect, Senator Cruz. The American people deserve to know what led to this. What exactly did Judge Dugan do?" Cruz was quiet for a beat too long, calculated. Then he spoke. Let me ask the committee a question. If a judge altered rulings after verdicts were issued, if someone in her chambers was caught redacting official records, what should I have done? The chamber froze, not metaphorically, literally. Senator Whitehouse's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The stillness was broken only when Senator Josh Hawley spoke. Are you saying there was tampering inside her courtroom? Cruz turned slightly toward him. I'm saying we found evidence, he said. Enough to act, enough to keep going. Senator Warren interjected louder now. Then why didn't you release that to the public? Because it's not finished. Because I don't run trials on Twitter. A few soft laughs escaped from the gallery, not amused, nervous. Cruz continued, Senator, you claim this hearing isn't political theater, but you scheduled it without reviewing a single piece of evidence. Warren's expression hardened, her voice rising. You're playing games. Cruz remained steady. No, I'm ending them. He turned back to the full committee. You want to talk about crossing lines? Then let's talk about the people who knew what was happening in that courthouse and stayed silent. Let's talk about who Judge Dugan was connected to and why nobody ever dared to ask why. Senators exchanged glances. Some leaned forward, others leaned back. Cruz sat back, hands folded in front of him. He wasn't grandstanding. He was shifting the center of gravity in the room. And now the accuser, Warren, looked like the one being boxed in. The silence was thick, no paper rustling, no whispered side remarks, just the low hum of a camera lens trying to stay in focus. Then Senator Marsha Blackburn spoke, slowly, carefully. Senator Cruz, you mentioned connections. What kind exactly? Cruz didn't hesitate. Judge Dugan maintained regular communication with two nonprofit organizations. He said, both received significant federal grants. Both have board members with direct financial stakes in cases that landed in her courtroom. Gasps were audible this time. Someone's pen dropped to the floor. Blackburn raised an eyebrow. Are you saying she ruled in favor of organizations that essentially paid her? I'm saying, Cruz answered, that we found a pattern. Rulings aligned over and over again with the financial interests of her known associates. Warren jumped in, now visibly irritated. Senator, let me remind you, implication is not evidence. Cruz nodded. I agree, which is why we didn't act on implications. He paused just long enough. We acted on audit trails, intercepted communications, sworn affidavits. The chamber didn't move. No one wanted to be the first to react. He paused, then added quietly, and we're not done. Senator John Kennedy leaned forward, his southern drawl slicing through the silence. Just how far does this thing go, Senator Cruz? This time, Cruz opened his folder for real. No dramatics, just deliberate motion. He slid a printed page across the table toward the committee clerk. The committee should know, he said, we traced multiple money transfers from a DC-based consulting firm, one tied to Judge Dugan's brother-in-law. He looked up, making eye contact with no one, and yet everyone. That same firm appears in at least 4 other investigations, all involving questionable rulings, and some of those judges still sit on the federal bench. The words hung in the air like fog. Senator Elizabeth Warren slammed her hand lightly against the table. This is reckless, she said sharply. You're casting a shadow over the entire judiciary. Cruz didn't move. No, Senator, he said, I'm shining a light. The tension snapped. Senator Amy Klobuchar cut in, trying to regain control. Let's be clear here. Are you accusing other federal judges of misconduct? Cruz answered evenly. I'm saying we've uncovered a pattern, one worth investigating. But that's what this hearing was supposed to be about, facts. Instead, it's become a performance, a defense of appearances. Senator Josh Hawley leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Sounds to me, he said slowly, like we're scratching the surface of something way bigger than Judge Dugan. Cruz didn't respond. He didn't have to. The look on his face said enough. Warren tried to pivot, tone tight and professional. Let's talk about your media appearances, Senator. Last year, you went on a conservative podcast and said the justice system is compromised. Isn't that a dangerous thing to say, especially for a sitting senator? Cruz allowed himself a faint smile. It was dangerous, he said, because it was true. Warren shook her head. "You're undermining public trust." "No, Senator," Cruz replied. "I'm rebuilding it." A pause, then slowly, deliberately, he looked across the entire committee. "You can't fix a system by pretending it's not broken." That line wasn't a defense. It wasn't a rebuttal. It was a warning, and it landed harder than anything printed on a headline. The hearing, originally designed to corner Ted Cruz, was beginning to feel like something else entirely. A reckoning. The committee broke for recess, but no one really left. Staffers sprinted out, phones already glued to their ears. Reporters whispered in corners, trying not to be obvious. And the senators, they circled. Warren leaned toward Klobuchar, her voice low, but her frustration visible. Senator Hawley nodded silently to Cruz as he passed. Senator Blackburn never left her seat, just kept flipping through notes, her pen tapping rhythmically on the desk. And Cruz? He sat there, still, calm, waiting. Behind closed doors, phones lit up across Washington. Newsrooms, law firms, and federal buildings. Everywhere the question echoed, what else does he have? 10 minutes later, the senators returned. The chair tapped the gavel. Session back in order. Senator Warren cleared her throat. "Senator Cruz, I want to return to your earlier claim that Judge Dugan's arrest is part of a broader investigation. Are there other warrants? Other judges under review?" Cruz didn't blink. "That information is sealed," he said. "But yes." It landed like a dropped hammer. The chamber clenched. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse jumped in. "So you're telling this committee, on the record, there is an ongoing investigation into multiple federal judges?" Cruz nodded. "I'm telling you that integrity doesn't stop at a black robe." Warren's voice dropped half an octave. "If what you're implying is true, Senator Cruz, then you've just declared war on the judiciary." Cruz's tone didn't waver. "No, Senator, I'm holding it accountable." The silence that followed was dense, thicker than before. Then finally, Senator Hawley again. "Do you have evidence linking any of these judges to political actors, lobbyists, legislators?" Cruz didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached back into his folder, this time pulling out a single sheet of paper. The room leaned in. "I have communication logs," Senator Cruz said, voice steady, "between Judge Dugan's office and a legal advisory firm." He let that land for a beat. "This firm employs 2 former congressional staffers. One of them," he added, looking up now, "used to work for this very committee." The temperature in the room dropped. Senator Warren's pen slipped from her fingers. Senator Blackburn froze mid-note. Cameras shifted, lenses zoomed. The clerk stood, instinctively moving to retrieve the document, but Cruz didn't release it. "This isn't for the public record," he said. "Not yet." Senator Klobuchar stood, tone more pointed now. "If you're making accusations against congressional staffers, Senator Cruz, you'll need to submit that to the committee." Cruz didn't blink. "And I will. To the appropriate investigators, not to a committee trying to write its own script." That line cut deep. The hearing shifted again, this time not just with tension, but with exposure. Names were entering the room. Real ones with real consequences. No one looked comfortable anymore. They looked cornered. What began as an effort to shame Cruz was now unraveling into something else entirely. Something far more dangerous to those asking the questions. Cruz leaned forward for what felt like a final declaration. "I didn't come here to defend an arrest," he said. "I came to say this: corruption isn't partisan, it's just been protected by power for too long." And with that, he sat back again. No drama, no anger, just truth, delivered like a scalpel. Everyone in the chamber now understood. This wasn't just a scandal. This was the sound of a system cracking from the inside. By the time the committee resumed its afternoon session, every major news outlet had picked up the story. CNN, Cruz drops bombshell, judicial network under federal investigation. Fox News, corruption crackdown, Senator Cruz names names on Capitol Hill. Social media, it detonated, but inside the chamber, Cruz wasn't done. He opened his folder one more time, this time revealing a sealed manila envelope. He held it up just long enough for the cameras to catch it. "Before this hearing concludes," he said, "this will be delivered to the Inspector General's office." The room jolted with sudden energy. Inside are sworn statements from 2 whistleblowers. Both are former staffers in Judge Dugan's chambers. He placed the envelope gently on the desk in front of him. Deliberate, inevitable. Senator Gillibrand leaned in, her voice softer now. And what do these statements allege? Cruz answered without hesitation. That Judge Dugan altered sentencing recommendations, that she received unauthorized briefings from outside consultants, and that she instructed staff to scrub official digital records post-verdict. Several senators glanced down at their notes. Others avoided eye contact completely. Senator Warren no longer hid her frustration. "This is a spectacle," she snapped. "You're undermining public institutions with unverified testimony." "No," Cruz replied. "I'm documenting why public trust was already gone." He tapped the envelope lightly. "These two whistleblowers risked their careers to come forward. They told me internal reporting channels led nowhere, that their complaints were buried, and when they asked questions, they were reassigned." Senator Kennedy spoke up, quiet but direct. "Are these staffers named?" Cruz nodded. "They are, and they're willing to testify." Senator Warren nearly raised her voice. "Then why not bring them forward here?" "Because," Cruz answered, "this committee never asked to hear from them. It asked to hear from me." That line stung. The room tightened. Senator Hawley smirked, unable to hide it. Even the stenographer paused for a beat. "It asked to see me." Cruz let the words hang in the air. The jab hit its mark. Senator Josh Hawley couldn't resist. He leaned back slightly, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sounds like the wrong witness is sitting in that chair." A few nervous chuckles escaped from the gallery. Even the stenographer's fingers paused for just a beat, but Cruz didn't flinch. "The whistleblowers weren't the first, by the way," he continued. "We've traced nearly a dozen informal complaints across 3 separate federal districts, all involving behavior consistent with Judge Dugan's chambers." He looked slowly around the room. "You want to know what they all have in common?" Silence. They were dismissed, quietly. No escalation, no consequence. Senator Gillibrand furrowed her brow. "Do you have proof?" "Internal memos," Cruz said. "Unredacted logs. And yes, we're compiling everything for federal review." He paused. "And we're not the only agency doing so." That line froze the room. Senator Blackburn narrowed her eyes. "Who else is involved?" Cruz gave a small, measured answer. "Let's just say the rot didn't go unnoticed." The committee had crossed a threshold. This wasn't about Ted Cruz anymore. This was about who looked away and who didn't. And for the first time all day, Senator Elizabeth Warren said nothing. Not because she lacked words, but because she finally understood how far this might reach and who it might implicate. Cruz hadn't left his seat all day, but the way he sat now, straighter, more resolute, signaled something was coming. Then, without fanfare, he placed a single sheet of paper on the table. No envelope, no folder, just one name, printed clearly. He didn't speak it. He didn't have to. Senator Hawley read it first. His eyebrows lifted. He looked across the room toward Warren. The energy shifted. Again. Senator Blackburn leaned over, scanning the page. Her eyes sharpened, then cut across the aisle to the Democratic side of the chamber. The name wasn't just any name, it was a sitting senior judge, a decades-long appointee, known publicly for championing judicial reform and ethics oversight. Senator Warren finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but taut. "You're not seriously suggesting he's involved?" Cruz looked directly at her. "No, Senator. I'm stating it as a matter of record." The chamber stilled. Again. Cruz continued, calm and deliberate. "Financial records show that Judge Dugan received payments from a legal trust, a trust partially managed by the office of the individual on that page." He didn't look away. "That trust funneled funds to consulting groups that show up in over a dozen federal case files, where conflicts of interest were never disclosed." Senator Sheldon Whitehouse jumped in, voice raised. "This is outrageous. You're accusing a respected jurist of laundering influence through a trust fund?" "I'm presenting data," Cruz replied. "Receipts, timelines, direct overlaps between financial movement and judicial rulings." Gillibrand looked visibly shaken. "Have any charges been filed?" "Not yet," Cruz said, "but a sealed inquiry is underway." Senator Warren snapped, more reaction than control. Then why mention it here? Cruz didn't raise his voice. Because this committee called me to explain an arrest. But that arrest was just the first thread. I'm showing you the rest of the sweater. The metaphor landed like a body blow. Senator Kennedy scratched his chin. So what you're saying is, this wasn't just one judge gone rogue? Cruz nodded slowly. I'm saying it never is. Warren tried once more to reassert control. This kind of disclosure undermines public trust in the judiciary. You're making this institution bleed on national television. Cruz leaned forward, clear, focused. No, Senator, it was already bleeding. I'm just showing people where the wound is. No one spoke. The silence this time wasn't tense. It was reverent, like everyone in the room had finally recognized what they were part of. Senator Hawley's voice broke the quiet. If what you're saying is true, then this goes beyond the DOJ. Cruz didn't hesitate. It does. That's why I've already briefed a senior oversight council, and that's why this isn't going away. Senator Warren glanced down at her notes, then up at the name on the page. Her hands fidgeted for the first time that day. Because this wasn't political theater anymore. This was a fault line, and someone had just driven a chisel right through it. Senator Warren's hands fidgeted for the first time, not because this was unexpected, but because it wasn't. Everyone in the room had known the name. They just never thought someone would dare to say it. The tone had officially shifted. The fiery confidence with which senators once fired off questions was gone, replaced now by carefully measured phrases, strategic deflections, and subtle glances toward aides and waiting cameras. They weren't trying to expose Ted Cruz anymore. They were trying to survive the fallout. Senator Warren tried to reclaim the floor. Senator Cruz, your comments today have sparked serious concern across this chamber. But let's not forget, this hearing is about process, about overreach. Let's return to the basics. Who authorized the arrest of a sitting judge? Cruz didn't blink. It was a coordinated decision between the Bureau, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Marshal Service. Warren pressed. Then where was the oversight? Why wasn't this committee informed in advance? Cruz tilted his head slightly. Because no one informs congressional committees about a sealed federal warrant. That's not oversight, Senator. That's interference. Senator Klobuchar spoke next, her tone softer now. You've made some serious claims today, Senator. Do you understand the implications of what you're doing? Cruz nodded slowly. Yes, that's why I didn't come empty-handed. He gestured toward the pile of documents already entered into the record. I brought records, testimony, digital trails. I brought facts. What this committee chooses to do with them is up to you. Warren leaned forward, her voice strained. Let me ask you plainly, do you believe that there is corruption in the judiciary? Cruz didn't hesitate. I don't believe it, he said. I've seen it. That line sucked the air out of the room. Not drama, conviction. Then Senator Hawley followed up. Senator Cruz, have any of the individuals you've named reached out to members of this committee? Warren bristled. That's speculative and inappropriate. But Cruz answered anyway. Yes. Heads turned. We've seen call logs, meeting schedules, text messages. He paused. One of the nonprofit executives linked to the payments met with a sitting senator's chief of staff just days before Judge Dugan's ruling in a financial regulation case. The chamber recoiled. Senator Warren slammed her palm lightly on the table. Not in fury, in desperation. This is exactly the kind of smear campaign that undermines the very foundation of our democracy. Cruz didn't respond immediately. Then calmly, only if it's false. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't suspenseful. It was resignation. The committee, which began the day trying to discredit him, was now scrambling just to keep up. Senator Blackburn leaned toward her microphone. Senator Cruz, what do you need from this committee right now? Cruz looked around the room, not as a politician, but as a man watching something long protected finally rupture. Two things, he said. First, a formal review of the judicial appointment vetting process. Second, independent oversight of court-affiliated nonprofits. That's where the trail starts. Warren opened her mouth to object, but stopped. Because at this point, everyone knew. This wasn't about party lines anymore. It wasn't about committee turf. It was about survival, and no one could guess whose name would come next. The hearing had stretched into the early evening, but no one dared leave. Phones buzzed under desks, cameras kept rolling. Even the interns had stopped taking notes. They were just watching now, watching a reckoning take shape, not because of noise, but because one man walked in with evidence. They were just watching now, eyes locked on Senator Ted Cruz, and Cruz, still poised, still in control. Senator Amy Klobuchar tried to shift the tone. Senator Cruz, this committee doesn't deal in conspiracy theories. If you're alleging criminal conduct, then take it to the proper authorities. Cruz didn't flinch. I already have, he said. That's why this hearing feels so uncomfortable. He didn't say it with bravado. He said it with certainty. Senator Elizabeth Warren jumped in, trying to reframe again. You've spoken about corruption, about connections, but what you haven't explained is motive. Why would a respected judge like Hannah Dugan risk everything? Cruz nodded just once. Power, he said, in the belief that no one would ever question it. He let the pause breathe. She was protected by silence, by access, by a system that punishes whistleblowers and rewards insiders who know how to play the game. Klobuchar tried again, searching for balance. Then where's the line, Senator? At what point does your pursuit of justice become a threat to judicial independence? Cruz leaned in, his voice softer but sharper. The line is truth, and for years that line has been blurred, not by investigators, but by those who wear robes and believe that makes them untouchable. That was the moment, not of panic, not of shouting, but of recognition. The room didn't turn because of noise. It turned because the truth hit too close. Senator Josh Hawley asked the next question, his tone now fully serious. What happens next? Cruz didn't miss a beat. We continue. We trace the networks. We protect the whistleblowers. And we let the public see what's been hidden for far too long. Senator Marsha Blackburn added softly, and the names? They'll come out, Cruz said. Not from me, from the evidence. That's how this has to work. Senator Warren exhaled sharply. So you're just going to keep dropping bombs and expect this committee to sort through the wreckage? Cruz's reply came without anger. No, Senator. I'm asking you to stop pretending the wreckage isn't already here. The sentence didn't just echo through microphones. It landed in the eyes of the staffers, the journalists, even the interns. All now frozen in their seats, no longer documenting, just absorbing. This wasn't Cruz tearing something down. This was Cruz pulling back the curtain, and behind it stood a system that had protected itself for too long. The final stretch of the hearing didn't feel like politics. It felt like a confession booth. No shouting, no grandstanding. Even Senator Warren, once fiery and relentless, sat back in her chair, arms crossed, pen tapping the pad. Not from strategy, but from habit. There was nothing left to deflect, because Cruz had done what no one expected. He didn't arrive with slogans. He arrived with names, numbers, documents, and silence had become the loudest thing in the room. Senator John Kennedy finally spoke. His voice was unusually still. Senator Cruz, I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of hearings. Most don't amount to much. He looked up. But this ain't normal. Cruz nodded. It wasn't meant to be. Kennedy continued. You've just accused elements of the judiciary of being compromised. You've suggested members of this very committee may have unknowingly or otherwise enabled it. That's not just explosive, that's historic. Cruz didn't blink. And necessary. Senator Gillibrand exhaled slowly and looked around the room. Then glancing toward Warren, she said, we'll need to open a formal inquiry. Senator Warren didn't respond. She couldn't. The words hung between them, heavier than gavel strikes. We already have one, Cruz said calmly. This hearing just gave it daylight. Senator Blackburn turned toward the chairman. Are we prepared to vote on issuing subpoenas? Silence. Then finally, Senator Warren, voice flat, will need to confer. No objection, no outrage, just delay. Cruz folded his papers with quiet precision. Everything I brought today, he said, will be submitted to the Oversight Archive. You'll have copies within the hour. Then he added, I'd also recommend you review internal communication protocols, because someone in this building leaked the Dugan photo before the arrest had even concluded. That bombshell fell flat, not from irrelevance, but because no one wanted to be the first to react. Cruz stood slowly, respectfully, deliberately. "I came here because this committee demanded answers," he said. "I gave them. What you do with them now is up to you." For once, no one followed him. No rebuttals, no attacks, because every senator in that room, in their own way, knew they had ignored something for far too long. Not always out of malice, sometimes just out of convenience, but silence too can be guilt. And that day, no one walked out of that room the same, least of all Senator Elizabeth Warren. The hearing was over. But the real story, it was just beginning. Within hours, headlines hit every screen in the country. CNN, Cruz uncovers judicial corruption network. Oversight committee stunned. Fox News, whistleblower or warrior? Cruz's Capitol confrontation shakes D.C. Every platform, the same themes, the connections, the financial trails, the silence. Senator Ted Cruz exited the Capitol through a back corridor. No interviews, no press conference. He didn't need one. The hearing was the press conference. Inside federal agencies, quiet operations were already underway. Flagged case files re-examined. A task force quietly activated. Its members handpicked. Its mission to follow the evidence. By morning, 2 federal judges had recused themselves. One nonprofit had issued a statement of denial. A staffer tied to the original leak had resigned silently. But what stayed with people, especially those who had watched the hearing live, wasn't a document or a headline. It was the look on Senator Elizabeth Warren's face as Cruz walked out. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. Recognition that the institutions once seen as untouchable no longer were. For months, Cruz had warned of systemic erosion, of integrity compromised, not by foreign enemies, but by insiders who mistook immunity for justice. And now, those warnings had names, signatures, wire transfers. That night, senators gathered again, behind closed doors, not to strategize spin, but to discuss reform. "We can't stop it now," one aide whispered to her chief. "The public's already seen too much." Across America, pundits sparred. Some called Cruz a reckless disruptor, others a whistleblower with a Senate badge. But for those who were really listening, something deeper had shifted. Not just trust in institutions that had already eroded, but belief that someone finally was willing to name names, stand alone, and say what no one else dared. As the news cycle churned, as networks raced to catch up, as political careers trembled in the aftershock, one truth settled quietly over Washington. He wasn't finished.